Okay. Right, ladies and gentlemen. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Willem Vogelsang. I'm the Deputy Director of the International Institute for Asian Studies here. Welcome. And you may have noticed this building is being renovated. You see a lot of things happening here. And also we are very busy here with preparations for the big International Convention of Asia Scholars, which is now in 4 or 5 weeks, mid-July. So everyone is running around. So I can't stay here for the lecture. I'm very sorry, but there are so many things happening. What we do at IIAS, many activities, but one of them is that, well, we have lots of fellows here who stay here for a month, or 10 months, or anything in between. And other people who come here, and we invite them. And one of the things we do is we invite them for what we call as a lunch lecture, which means there is food. And we try to keep it informal, so the speaker will talk for about 20 minutes, half an hour, and it's the idea that afterwards you have a discussion on the subject. Now, I would like to introduce Jolanda, and you have such a Brunnekreef of Brunnekreef? What?
Brunnekreef.
Brunnekreef,
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And Jolanda, I read your introduction. You've been everywhere, isn't it? In areas that are a bit dangerous.
Yeah, dangerous, yeah.
I read the Congo, Southern Sudan, Kashmir, Iraq.
Yeah,
so you really look for areas where things are happening, isn't it?
Well, that's the result of my studies and development, I think. I'm not per se looking for dangerous areas.
Yeah, but it happens.
Being a general advisor for the organization PAX, the peace movement, naturally I would end up in areas like Congo, Sudan, Kashmir, and that can be rather dangerous at times, but nothing happens.
It's a very adventurous life, let's put it that way, yes. Ilana just completed the book. It has been published in April, I read, The Karma Revolution. And actually, while we talked about it this 5 minutes ago, it's a subject that perhaps in the Western world is you don't really talk about it. It's about perhaps a bit of a taboo subject here. It's about the caste system in India and in South Asia actually, and the repercussions also on discrimination, etc. And now Jolanda is going to talk about it. Let me also say that it touches a bit also, I mentioned the Western world, how it looks on South Asia, academic freedom. And that actually is one of the subjects that we'll discuss at length also during the big IIAS conference in July. And what can you talk about? And what can be the repercussions if you talk about it? And what is the kind of self-censorship that you don't talk about it? I think that is... So, Jolanda, we're looking forward to listen to you. Okay. You said about 20 minutes, half an hour.
Yeah.
And then there will be questions. And I'm very sorry I have to leave again. But I'm sure you're going to have... You'll enjoy it. Well, enjoy is perhaps not the words, but
we will miss you for sure.
I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah. So, Jolanda, also this lecture, this talk is being streamed. It's called, so people all over the world can follow you.
Oh well, I didn't need to know that information.
Oh, dear.
To be honest.
But I think if you sit or stand
already.
here, the camera's over there. So if you come here,
yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jolanda.
See you again.
Yes, okay, see you soon.
Yes.
Thank you.
So welcome everybody here. I'm very pleased to see so many people here. I had no idea how many people there would be, but it's a rather good number. So thank you for coming to this lecture. Indeed, the lecture is based on this book that I published recently in Dutch. The Karma Revolutie. In English it would be something like the Karma Revolution, and I desperately hope there will be an English translation somewhere in the future, because I think the scope in English will be much bigger than in Dutch, but I do see already quite a lot of interest for what I'm trying to present in the Netherlands as well. How did this book come about? Actually, I have been working in this field for the last 12 years, starting with working for what used to be called the India Committee Netherlands. Now the organization is called ARISA, and they are focusing on human rights in South Asia. And only when I started working for them in 2007, I learned about how huge the problem is around caste and caste discrimination. Although I was married to somebody from Sri Lanka and lived in Sri Lanka for a couple of years, and although I graduated as an anthropologist and did research on the trafficking of Sri Lankan women, for example, despite those facts, even I didn't know to which extent this problem is happening in South Asia. So I was really appalled when I learned the truth about it, and I actually found a whole world existing in South Asia about which we don't know much in this part of the world. But even in South Asia itself, a lot is not known about what is really happening to the Dalits, who are living on the down end of the caste ladder. I don't know how many of you are acquainted with the caste system itself. Do you know anything about it?
Sure.
Yes, okay. So generally, I can assume you know what the caste system is and who Dalits are. They are the ones who used to be called the untouchables, for example, and who were called by Gandhi the Harijans, children of God, which for themselves was a very offending term, actually. Because they want to be seen as equal human beings, so they don't want to be patronized and being called children of God. For them, Gandhi anyway is not a character they really look up to very much, but that is part of my book, why that is and how that can be explained. Anyway, in the past 12 years I really dug deep into this reality of the Dalit lives in South Asia. And I found out that the problem is not only restrained to India, but it's happening all over South Asia. And I picked 2 other countries to also go into the reality there and also see whether there are differences. And yeah, to see what we can learn also from those differences. So actually it's happening all over South Asia and also in the diaspora, so everywhere where South Asians are living now, for example in the UK, they took the problem with them, and even in the UK there are several organizations fighting caste discrimination in the UK itself, and there's even legislation being made at this moment. Further on, what I would like to stress is that it's not only taking part within Hinduism realm, but it's happening within every religion and every part of society in South Asia. So also within Christianity, Buddhism, and that is something generally people in the West really have no idea about at all. Furthermore, it's not a matter of the past. A lot of people, also in South Asia itself, try to claim that caste discrimination is not really happening anymore and that it's something of the past. Unfortunately, it's not. It's maybe even more alive than ever, especially since the Hindutva government in India is ruling. The problem has grown ever more, but maybe in other forms than before. But even a problem like untouchability, so the discrimination based on the idea of cleanliness and uncleanliness, is still happening a lot. Another thing that I really wanted to stress in my book is that the caste system is not a forbidden system. Often in books, literature, on the internet, in general thinking about caste, people tend to think that the caste system is forbidden by law in India. And it's not. It is true that caste discrimination is forbidden, but the caste system as such is not forbidden. And the discrimination is of course inherent to the system. So yeah, it doesn't solve a lot if you forbid only caste discrimination and not the system itself. And that is one of the controversies between, for example, Gandhi and the big leader of the Dalits. Up till today, he's seen as the biggest leader of Dalits, Dr. Ambedkar. He was living in the same period of time as Gandhi, and he was one of the writers also of the Constitution of India. He was one of the people who said, if we want to get rid of this problem, we have to get rid of the caste system altogether. And Gandhi opposed that. He didn't want that. Anyway, what I also found during these 12 years, I worked very closely and very deeply with the Dalit movement, the resistance movement, and they are present everywhere, especially in India, but also fortunately in growing numbers in the surrounding countries. And I call it Dalit movement, and at the same time it's not really one movement. It's like a whole scattered field of different kinds of organizations and individuals who are fighting this problem. And that is at the same time also a weakness, that they are not united, and there's a lot of struggle within the Dalit community going on, who is the real leader and who is doing it in the proper way. So, but you see that, of course, with every kind of emancipation movement happening all over, that to find your core business and your strength, it's also goes along with a lot of inner fights. But that is one of the reasons why sometimes people ask me, why are they, if the numbers are so big, if you talk about 300 million Dalits in South Asia, why don't they gather together and by numbers they can be such a big opponent? But that's one reason, that they are not united, and also many of them are living in the countryside and don't know at all what their rights are. So it's just a very, very marginal layer of Dalits who are able to get education and who are able to get up in life and who are able to get some sort of a leadership position. Well, during these 12 years of working with Dalits, I found out a lot of lessons which we can also learn from here in this part of the world in terms of identity, power and culture. That interrelatedness of these themes. Well, the Dalits give a lot of examples what we can learn from. First of all, it's important, I think, to stress that Dalit is an identity that people made themselves. They have been called by others by many other terms, like pariahs, untouchables, Harijans, but they themselves call themselves Dalits, which means trampled people. So it's a chosen name, clearly showing an identity of resistance. And what was nice, the other day I was here in Leiden at the Museum for Volkenkunde. At present there is a nice exhibition going on, Most Wanted called. And in this exhibition it's about the popularity of gangsters and the role that gangsters can have in a society where especially governments are not doing what they ought to do towards their population. In this exhibition I found a poster of Pulan Devi, who was a bandit queen actually of Dalit background, and she became a huge hero fighting against the ruling class and castes. And she's part of this exhibition, and I thought it's a nice example of showing, to emphasize actually this identity of resistance. in my book I also highlight a part which is maybe a bit strange at first sight. The Roma in Hungary, for example, they identify very closely with Dalits in India, I found. It was very surprising. They are in a very small corner of eastern Hungary. There is a community who call themselves the Ambedkar community, and they use terms from the Dalit movement such as Jai Him. I don't know, so maybe some people here know. And they are Roma, and they have found out about the fate of Dalits and their fight in Asia, and they identify with them, and not because they think in terms of, oh, our history is also from India, that Roma are originally stemming from India, and that is also often of big importance to them. But they identify with Dalits especially because they see they have the same place in society. Dalits in Asia, Roma in Europe. And again, they recognize this kind of identity of resistance. Vice versa, there are also Dalits who recognize this similarity with Roma in Europe. So there is an exchange going on there. And that's very interesting. Speaking about this identity issue, what I found in Sri Lanka, for example, is that people who are actually falling in the category of Dalit don't call themselves as such in Sri Lanka. The term doesn't exist in Sri Lanka, it's not used. I spoke to some activists who wouldn't call themselves Dalit activists, but who are actually striving for the same purposes in Sri Lanka. And they would say, yeah, we did try to unite people on this term of Dalits, and for example, make them enthusiastic about Ambedkar, and motivate them to do something together. But it didn't work out. In Sri Lanka, people don't see a value in that, because their situation in Sri Lankan society is very different from the situation in India. And they see more help, for them it's more helpful to identify as laborers, for example. I go into deeper into that in my book, so if you're interested to learn how exactly this works, you can read that. Well, I will quickly go on to the lessons that I learned from this whole journey in the world of Dalit. That identity is not we know that of course by now, but still there are a lot of people who think otherwise, that identity is not a fixed or static thing. It can be altered and it can be used as a form of resistance. But when that happens, when identity politics are going on, which is going on everywhere in the world, on a big scale these days, of course, it can also make us clear something. And I think that this is often not recognized in debates about identity and about certain issues such as color, race, gender, caste. It is not recognized that identity has something to do with power relations. And there we go wrong in the discussions, I think. For example, within the Netherlands, we have the example of the Zwarte Piet discussion. I'm sorry for some people that I'm mentioning, because there is a huge level of tiredness around this discussion. But I think that that level of tiredness itself is showing also the confusion around these kind of discussions, because people are not talking on the same lines, and there is so much misunderstanding of what actually is the issue here, you know. So white Dutch people feel attacked in their identity and heritage, while black people rightfully try to point out that it's offensive and how it relates to racism. And in those discussions, I think what is lacking is to highlight how it relates to power relationships and inequality because of power relationships. So I saw this same thing happening the other day at the Day of Anthropology, which was here in Leiden as well. And one could think anthropologists have the tools to talk in a sensible way about these issues, but there too, this same confusion was propping up time and time again. For example, one young researcher said, yeah, I'm white, so I cannot go into a multicultural or black community and do research there in a proper way. It's going to be flawed no matter what. Unfortunately, there was Professor Wayne Modest. I don't know, some of you may know about him. He's the head of the Museum for Material Culture. And he rightfully said, no, it's not about you as an individual being white or black. It's about the whole power system behind it. And we have to learn to understand that and what that means. And of course you can do research there, being a white person, but you have to realize what color as a system means, and the discrimination based on color. And I had my own experience in this field with the Dalit movement as well, where this confusion also played a part when Dalit women, some young Dalit women, were negative towards me dealing with this problem, with this topic. They thought I'm trying to own something which is not mine and not my place, and I'm a white Westerner, privileged woman, and it's none of my business to write a book about this topic. And that was, it was not nice to experience, but at the same time it was also very helpful in learning more about these interrelated issues of ownership and power relations. And quite a lot around this is going on in my book. You can read more about it if you like. And another lesson is, I think, a very important one, that the case of the Dalits show the importance of the tool of the understanding of intersectionality. And we should really take more notice of that there are different overlapping social identities that do have a direct impact on how life in practice works out. For example, James Baldwin, a very well-known black activist who wrote I'm Not Your Negro, and he's also explaining this very nicely when a white psychologist in a debate tells him, why always this emphasis on color? Aren't we all diverse people? Why can't we treat each other as diverse people and see the similarities between each other instead of the differences? And then James Baldwin answers, yeah, as long as because of my color I cannot walk that street safely and you can because you're white, we have to raise this issue of color. And that's exactly what is happening in, with other power and identity issues such as caste, gender, and a lot more. And in direct action, also in action towards human rights, for example, we have to integrate that into our approach, and it's still not done. We talk about it, but it's not actually practiced. Yeah, so these are the challenges and conclusions that I came up with. A lot of I've mentioned already. They're listed here once again. I think this is generally the outcome of my own search into this problem of caste discrimination. Fortunately, there is no turning back. The Dalit movement is there, and it will stay there, and it will develop. And yeah, we don't know exactly whether it's going to solve everything or whether caste discrimination is ever going to disappear. But nevertheless, the fight against it will always be there. Yeah, and one of the biggest lessons that Dalits teach us is that we have to take into consequence that the realization that power relationships and identity are there, and we have to address it, and we have to go into the confrontation. And as another scholar says, Doom, who wrote Spiegelparijzen, he said, we tend to see this confrontation as something which shouldn't be there. For example, in the Zwarte Pieten discussion, we find it a nuisance, and we don't want these kind of things. But it's maybe important to realize that exactly these inconvenient issues are telling us something, are showing us something. So we have to accept that confrontation and not regard it as a drama, but as the core business. And I would like to end my presentation with the words of Dr. Ambedkar. Equality may be a fiction, but nonetheless one must accept it as a governing principle. Well, what I haven't done today is to go into the examples of all the talks I had with Dalits in South Asia. That is the biggest part of my book, of course, the interviews with Dalit women, organizations, farmers, lawyers, children, people working in the stone quarries, and that, of course, in different countries. So I didn't go into that for today, but if you're interested, I would suggest you pick up my book. Okay, thank you. So, I'm curious, are there any questions?
Yeah, I guess these people in Burma, the Rwandas,
Yeah.
they are also sort of Dalits, isn't it?
Yeah, in a matter of speaking, Dalits themselves also say that everybody who is facing injustice is actually a Dalit, you know. Some people also, of course, go against that idea, saying no, that is not pure, that is, how do you say, making the discussion impure, because the identity of Dalits should be refrained to us only, the ones who are in the caste system and on the bottom end of the caste system. But there are also a lot of Dalits indeed who say, yeah, no, everybody who is in a kind of position like we are could be called a Dalit.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
That's right.
I thought that the term Roma, you mentioned that this a tribe or whatever you used to call it in Hungary, but I have a feeling that any gypsies in Europe falls under the classification of Roma. Is that right, or am I wrong?
Yes, you have Roma, Sinti, travelers. They have a distinction among each other why they call themselves as they call themselves. But in this particular case in Hungary, indeed, it's about gypsies living in the eastern part of Hungary, and they call themselves Roma.
Oh, so when the term Roma is used, it really refers to these gypsies in Hungary?
Indeed, yeah,
okay.
Yes. And what was interesting, the other day there was a memorial celebration in Kamp Westerbork, especially for Roma and Sinti, who were victims in the Second World War. And I had a lot of discussions there as well with people, and Roma immediately recognized this topic, even though they may have never heard about caste or caste discrimination. But if you only after a few lines they immediately understand what the situation is about. And so that's very interesting. While if you talk to people who are living in another kind of position, in power positions in the world, they often do not recognize these things. So that's very interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a really interesting talk. I just want to sort of, I'm not familiar with South Asia, more familiar with Southeast Asia, but I'm sort of wondering when did the term Dalit come from? Because you said that it emerges, I think, as a fairly sort of new construct, pushing against this idea of untouchable and so on. And secondly, I was also wondering if you could share since you have so much conversations that we don't really get to hear about, how the identity of being female intersects with the Dalit identity and how that comes out in the experiences of the women that you have talked to.
Yes.
And sorry, but last final question, sort of leveraging on the previous, on the identification of the Dalit identity with other sort of international movements of peoples who are repressed. And I'm wondering if the Dalit kind of framing of their experiences intersects in any way with the indigenous peoples?
Yeah, very interesting question. Yes, good questions. First of all, you're right, the term Dalit is relatively new. It emerged maybe around the time, a little bit before the time of the independence struggles. And actually, it's really a made-up identity, because Dalits themselves, if you really look at the reality of the picture, they are also divided again into a huge number of different groups related to professions and related to all kinds of ideas of higher and lower. Even among the Dalit communities themselves, there is this this idea of higher and lower, and pure and impure going on. The construction of the word Dalit and as a clear term of resistance, identity of resistance, has been there only in the past decennia. And sometimes it serves people well, sometimes it doesn't. In India, for example, you can see that the people who are there by the government, it's also called a different name, the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. By law, they're called that. And the funny thing is that the Indian government gives privileges to people from scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Now, for example, where this becomes very nasty is that people who try to escape their fate as being Dalit, and who, for example, try to do that by converting to another religion, they end up empty-handed, because only the Hindu Dalits can make use of these offerings of the government. So it takes a lot of different phases, whether it's useful or not, and when it is useful, and but at the same time, all over, within the activist world, people still are very keen on using the term. Yes. And in the preface of this book, Neera Wickramasinghe, professor here at the South Asia Department in Leiden, she also raises that question: why would Dalits do this? Why would they hang on to this kind of identity, which also sort of condemns them again into this category? Why not try to escape from it altogether? And that's the other side of it, that Dalits really see benefits in holding on to this identity, even though it also refers to sides that are not so nice or beneficial in life. And your second question?
Gender and...
Yes, there's a lot going on in that sense. Dalit women are coming up very strongly in the activist world, and they have a fight of their own in terms of they are double discriminated by being Dalit and by being women. They also face a lot of violence from their own men. And that's at the same time a difficult factor, because Dalit women do group and identify on base of being Dalit women, and they have a very specific place within feminism and Indian feminism, but at the same time they also do not want to placard or put down their own men. So it's a very complicated situation for them often. And they play a huge role in bringing forward exactly these kind of themes. They are doing I think a fantastic job in that. I don't know if that answers your question enough.
Let's find out more.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit more afterwards. And your third question?
Just a sort of quick thought about how this connects to the indigenous peoples movement.
Oh yeah, right. Surprisingly, there is very little connection so far, and that is starting as we speak to develop more. So the Dalit movement so far has been very much faced inwards, like trying to figure out where are we, what should we do, how should we position ourselves. And only now actually there is more space coming about to see, there are other people also, other groups of people also in the world whom we can relate to, and even within South Asia itself, like the Adivasi indeed, the indigenous people. And you see slowly that there are groups trying to reach out to each other. But of course they also have different issues. They're not, you cannot put them all together in one big box because they also still have different issues to deal with. And that is of course always the search for where can we unite and work together for similar issues we face, but where do we also go astray and have differences. So that is very much going on. Yeah.
I was wondering if similar or comparable things within white society, in Western society, do you have any?
Yeah, definitely.
This kind of
yeah, I think that is one of the things I really try to highlight in my analysis, in my book, is that these themes are happening everywhere. In South Asia, we have this specific system of caste, and that has to be notified as well. That is a very specific system. As such, it doesn't exist here in the West. We have class, and we have something like from the past the nobility or the adel or something like that, but it's still not the same kind of thing. So on the one hand, it's very important to stress the uniqueness and the specificness of caste and caste system. At the same time, of course, there are a lot of relations going on in this field of the interconnectedness of identity, power, and culture. And we have these discussions going on a daily basis. Sylvana Simons, de Zwarte Pieten discussie, in terms of color, class, and the gele hesjes. So there's a lot of also a lot of unsatisfied people at the moment with politics, and a lot of different streams going on who want to change society. And a lot of people who see that we have to change something, but how and what and where. And that is very interesting, the developments going on. And maybe it's a long shot what I'm trying to do, but indeed I do see a lot of lessons that we can learn from studying these topics, and anthropologists, for example, do that. But even within the academic world, there's still so much confusion going on. What are we talking about, and how do we use these concepts in a proper way? Okay.
So actually, tagging on to that question, you have touched on, I suppose, an interesting theme. And being, I was born in Sri Lanka myself,
Okay.
and I do know the caste-related system.
Right.
And I happen to live here in Europe for a couple of decades, so I have the privilege of also understanding, let's say, the social context here. Now, obviously, the term caste, I mean, it's a question also of language in that sense. It's somehow related to social structure. And you just mentioned and said, in Europe, we talk about the class struggle. So in my view, and I would like to have your opinion on it, I mean, it's very good that people like you study the Asian culture and try to see what's going on and compare India, Sri Lanka, and maybe other countries. But in my view, with a globalized world, I think you also have caste system in Europe. Maybe you don't use the same language, but it is in essence the same thing. And I think it will be very interesting also for the academics to figure out how this really matters. Because I did have a small discussion with Wayne, because you're talking about slavery and so on. And it's always seen as something far away.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the shortcomings where the European academics, maybe I'm generalizing too much, but I think they also have to critically look at the class struggle, which is very much related, even if you take the Daleks, it's got to do, like you said, in Sri Lanka, it's about labor movement, because it's about having employment. Caste system is based on some work. So I think it will be interesting to do this comparison so that people don't think that it is so far away and not here. It's not.
Yes. Yeah, I agree
Maybe
with
the
you.
next book.
Yeah, well, maybe I would like to, if you could read my book and then we talk further and hear your ideas about what I write, maybe we can do that. And I really seriously mean that. I would be very interested, because that is my search indeed. On the one hand, it's a unique system and we need to highlight that, because I think the tendency to also put it away as something, we know it everywhere in the world, is also holding a dangerous side in it. That we lose the vision on how, what's really going on within that caste system itself. Because the ideas that are stemming from it are really very, very basically very different from, for example, the European way of thinking, underlying European way of thinking. And this is maybe a dangerous thing I'm saying, but cultural relativism is of course a very, very big topic. Well, the difference is that I found out that we in the West tend to think that other cultures, although they are different, will generally somehow still be the same as ours. That is based on the notions of equality, the triple thing, justice, equality, brothership, fraternity, exactly. But in South Asia, society is really, basically, very much about inequality. And not with a desire or notification somewhere that should be different. And that's very, very deeply entrenched in South Asian society. And I think that mistake is made a lot, you know. So if you want to make the comparisons too quickly, too easily, there is a big danger in that also in terms of the Dalek people themselves. Not that it's not recognized what is really going on and in what big of a fix they are, you know, so to speak.
Well, it's a very interesting thing. This the reason my interest is in heritage. I'm not a historian or anthropologist. I'm an engineer. And people like Mira, because actually what you're saying goes to my thesis. You know, if you look at Asia or outside Europe, there was 500-600 years, there has been a dominance of the West,
yes.
if you will. Okay. Now, there was a transition from monarchy. You had a class system in Asia, which also had kings and so on,
Right.
and also in Europe. So the emancipation of, let's say, the European society and the big experiment in the United States, right, with democracy and so on, has not, if you take the Asian countries, democracy has been there, 78 years, the most.
That's right.
Yeah. So you have this history of 500-600 years of different transition period, if you will. Yeah. So in many ways, I think you can compare, and there's no difference. Only the language that is used, and maybe the theoretical constructs,
Yes.
depending on the discipline, is different. But if you go back to the essence, and that's what I was trying to tell Wayne, it's about human nature in the end.
Yes, that's true.
That is the essence of the story, how cruel we can be to each other.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
I totally agree. Yes.
Yeah, so this is, I think, maybe it will come,
Yeah.
this realization that even though it may, in the first instance, appear not relevant, I strongly believe that this could make, let's say, it could make it relevant, and you can compare both systems, virtually one-to-one.
Yes, that would be very good and interesting to do, and it's also important what you emphasize, the contemporality of things, how things move on in terms of time, and that we of course can't see into the future, but we know what is the situation now, and I think besides having this overall view and taking into notice history and contemporality, we do also have to state what's really going on the ground at the moment. So that's actually was my starting point with this book. What you see then is that in the here and now, things are not being mentioned as they are. For example, the Indian government is very actively trying to cover up what is really happening. In my case, for example, just an example, the years I worked for the India Committee Netherlands, I worked under a secret name so that I could ask for a tourist visa on my own name. Otherwise, there was no way to enter India. Because if you would deal with these kind of issues, it happens every day, people don't get a visa anymore. We did a lot of lobby work in the EU, for example, and parliamentarians would plainly tell us, yeah, we want to speak out against these things, but the minute we try to do that, we get a delegation of the Indian government to visit us and to directly threaten us. If you speak out on it, we will make things very difficult for you in terms of the trade and economic links. So, you know, that is there in the here and now going on. The Indian government is really doing a very bad thing, and under the pretext, indeed, of being the biggest democracy in the world. And I think it's very important that these kind of things are being mentioned and highlighted. And having said that, I totally agree with you that the structures underlying and contemporary history is very important, and we should try to see all those contexts, see them for what they are. Yeah.
Also, United Nations addressing this issue.
Yes, they are.
How are they addressing it?
Yeah. Yeah, the United Nations is a different story. No, that's not nice. They are trying, but it stays limited to legislation and protocols, and it's not being made effective. For example, there has been an attempt by the UN to monitor these issues within India, and they simply don't get access. And that's happening, but no action is being taken. Another example that's on the scale of the EU, for example, we have the International Dalit Solidarity Network in Europe, which is a rather big network of European countries supporting Dalit and their cause. They, so far, don't have accreditation within the EU. So when they want to organize something, they have to do it under the wings of some other organization. And the Indian mafia is that strong that up till today they prevent IDSN from getting accreditation within the EU. So these kind of things is what we're talking about. Yeah.
Can I come in?
Yes.
You know, I can only respond to what you said here,
Mm.
and there are a whole lot of issues which you've raised.
Mm.
We have a horrible government, undoubtedly. Yet, what is also amazing is that there have been a constant stream of research, both within India and of people coming from outside India, writing and publishing in their own names a lot of academic literature, because we also have an incompetent government, which is not so incompetent now, maybe. So I'm surprised that you had to use this guy's name. I've had students coming from outside who published on Dalit history, etc.
Yes.
Dalit movements, Dalit writings. But what I was also wondering was that in your research, in your book, to what extent is there a historical perspective? Because I think that makes a lot of difference in terms of the way one might think of the term Dalit, the Dalit movement. You know, okay, Phule coined Dalit in the 19th century. It was there, it was circulating in Maharashtra. Ambedkar picked it up. They became different people as they did. It's not, the problem there which comes up is that it's not true that everyone who falls into those castes, even today, big groups, will call themselves Dalit. And that is where governments like the Hindutva government and others are able to enter.
Yes.
I mean, 40 years ago, outside Maharashtra, the term Dalit was hardly known. It was not known even in South India, where there was strong anti-Dalit movement. In North India, people claim the term Harijan. And if we are going to understand the dynamics of what is happening to the Dalit movement today, that history and that dynamics is necessary, because the Hindutva government is being able to bring Dalits to them.
Yes, you're right.
In a way in which we can only recognize if we do not make the mistake, just as we have to see the caste system as unique, we cannot make the mistake of assuming that the Dalit term has been accepted across the board.
No, totally right.
I think part of that is also relates, as you said, to the issue of intersectionality, because you will have somebody like Mewani in Gujarat who will say we cannot talk only of Dalits, we have to talk of class issues, we have to talk of gender issues, and somebody like Mayawati who will not want to talk of those. So I think the dynamics of that movement and the history, because the caste system has also changed over time.
Definitely.
And the other thing which was worrying me is, you know, Humo made this wonderful contrast which you also picked up on, Homo equalis in Europe homo hierarchicus in South Asia. And there was a lot of critique of that. And one of the critiques was in terms of history. And the other was that as anthropologists and sociologists, we know that often what people talk about, the discourse, and what is done is different.
Yes.
So Homo equalis went along with a lot of reinforcements of ascriptive discrimination.
Yes, definitely.
Whereas in the long history of the Indian context, there have been strong currents constantly against equality.
Yes.
I mean, against inequality.
Yes.
Against inequality.
Yeah.
Whether it's Buddhism, whether it was Jainism, whether it was Sikhism, whether it was the various bhakti movements.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's that dynamic which one would want to know. Otherwise, it's like there's no escape.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's just one big of everyone believing in inequality and fighting for inequality rather than equality, unless it comes from outside and
Yeah.
is brought in by, I mean, that's what colonialism tried to say.
Yes.
You know, white man's burden, we are going to make your
Yeah.
load. But the fact is people were doing it within them. And this is what is I worry about.
Yeah.
Again, one other thing it might be interesting to look at is Durban, the Durban conference.
Right. Right.
And where, you know, in terms of making connections internationally, it actually began even before the Durban conference and
Yeah.
continues.
Yeah.
And of course, the Indian government didn't want casteism to be put down as racism, so they protested.
Yes.
But other groups went there and asserted that it is.
That's right.
And again, one more thing, the Lambadas, you know, the Romas, are usually linked up with a scheduled tribe, a gypsy tribe in India, the Lambadas. So this is very interesting, that there's a group which links themselves to the Daleks
Yeah.
rather than the
Yes.
indigenous movements
Yes.
in
Indeed, that is interesting, yes.
But I think the history is
No.
essential to get the dynamics of what caste discrimination is today.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think if you read the book, you will find a little bit more of the historical perspectives. Yeah, maybe you can help me to get an English translation. No, but I totally agree. And of course, this story I'm telling here today is rather black and white, but these differences and emphasis in historical terms, yeah, are very important to make indeed. On the other hand,
You know,
yeah,
there's a long history of scholarship in India,
I know, yeah,
including looking at caste vis-a-vis racism,
yeah.
etc.
Yeah, one thing maybe what I can say, not per se as a defense, because I totally agree with everything you say, but is this book came about actually to focus on the people here, to bring at least, and it's not an academic work by the way, but it's more like a ethnographic narrative or journalistic work, stemming also from my own journey into these issues, and stemming from the notification that in the West people really have no clue at all what's going on in South Asia. And even within the academic world, I noticed that there's little knowledge about this part of South Asian society. And it's even often lacking in analysis, the whole dimension of caste. So that is the background of this book, is very much focusing on people here and a general public here. So yeah, you can go into a lot of nuances, and there's so much to be said. I mean, there are libraries full of books and scientific works on this. And yeah.
Yeah, it's just my fear that I haven't read the book, I'm just going by what you said, that you might end up reinforcing the sort of ideas which Gloria Wecker writes about when she writes about white innocence, and the ideas of the white man's burden if the fact that there are people fighting within, not just they're Dalits fighting, they're non-Dalits fighting, if that doesn't get represented.
Yes.
One more thing, please do not excuse the EU governments by saying that, from what you said just now, that the Indian government will not allow trade. What needs to be raised is that the EU governments and the European governments are ready to sell out on human rights as soon as the corporate profits gets threatened. I think that
definitely.
has to be the emphasis.
It should
rather
be.
than saying that they get blackmailed. It's like, okay, you go on about human rights.
You're right.
As long as your long as your profits are not being affected.
Yeah, you're totally right. Totally right. The other day there was a photograph of our Prime Minister with Modi smiling and happily. Yeah, it's obnoxious. It's a shame, indeed. Yes. And that should be addressed. Totally agree. And a lot more should be the voices of Dalits themselves and the resistance going on there. Those are the voices to be heard. And I'm trying to contribute to that, mainly with, there's a list in this book with all the movements and Dalits and people that I spoke to, and I'm trying to create more awareness here so that those voices are being heard. That's very necessary. Yeah. And I would like to know who you are and talk further.
I'm Rajni Paliwala. I teach sociology at the university.
Okay.
Which is basically sociology and anthropology.
Great.
And I'm here to do research on the Dutch.
Wow, fantastic.
Which I did 20 years earlier also, so this is a repeat time.
Were you also the researcher doing research on healthcare in the Netherlands, or that's somebody else?
Human single parents.
Okay. Well, I'd like to speak more with you.
If I may ask, what drives you to look at this particular subject?
That's a very interesting question.
I hope it's not too personal.
No, it should be. It should be personal indeed. I think that one reason is that at quite a young age I got deeply involved in the South Asian society, because I got married to somebody from Sri Lanka and I lived in Sri Lanka during the war, and I came back, of course, in the end to the Netherlands, but up till today my ex-husband, he's ill, is suffering from schizophrenia. We have gone a very, very long way, also seeing the other sides of the Netherlands. What it means to be a foreigner in the Netherlands, to be ill in the Netherlands, and from my part, to be married to a foreigner. And I saw a lot of different sides of the Netherlands due to this relationship. At the same time, I also saw a part of reality in South Asia. So I got sort of stuck in between those worlds. And that was reinforced actually when I started working for the India Committee Netherlands, dealing with the Dalit movement that went so deep into that society, and it was so shocking also for me to see. So maybe this whole book is just the effect of trauma that I suffered. Who knows? That can very well be. But indeed, it touched upon so many issues that I came across in personal life, but also within the field of anthropology, within the field of the activist world, human rights, and it never let go of me. I worked for quite a long time for PAX, the peace movement, in conflict areas around the world, and of course there the same kind of topics are also cropping up time and again, and at the same time I felt like this is not a war situation, that is more comprehensive for most people, a war, But there is a kind of a war going on at the same time in South Asia. And that never left my mind. So at a certain moment I had the time and a publisher to do something with the topic, and I did. And yeah, the value of it, it's very interesting for me to talk with you guys now and to keep on having these kind of discussions, because that is also my own personal search. What is the value of what I'm trying to do here, and how does it relate to this huge movement going on? And maybe it's totally misplaced what I'm trying to do, can be. There certainly will be people who think so. But on the other hand, yeah, it was something I wanted to do and needed to say, and okay.
Well,
And the criticism is also welcome, up to some extent.
You will have enough of that.
Later on I will crawl into my bed and cry. That stupid book. No, having said that, this book also mainly came about because of my huge admiration for the people that I worked with. That I really have to emphasize. The people who are working day and night, I mean, their names are in the book. That is so incredible. That is so, yeah, what somebody has to say something about it, you know, what's happening there and how people are against all odds fighting for a place in society and to be just a human being. And that's so amazing. That is, I think that may be the biggest reason, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
You know, I'd like to say one thing. I'm afraid it will be controversial, but I'm still going to say it. I have roots in Asia. I was born there, I was raised there,
Okay.
I lived there a long time, I traveled a lot. So after, and as I grow older, sometimes I feel more Asian than European. Now, from this perspective, I want to say that I think you can only, no, not only, but the most effective way to root out this problem is from within. But unfortunately, it's my feeling, my impression, that Asian people tend to accept their fate and are don't have the fighting spirit to address the issue from within.
But then
But
I
that's
really
what-
would recommend my book, because the fighting spirit is there so much.
It is.
Yeah,
Okay. I
they're
hope so.
amazing,
I hope
amazing.
so.
We can learn from that so much.
Okay.
If you would want to put it in such terms.
No,
Yeah, no,
I'm
really.
sure for you
Not
that
just
the women
today.
are
And not
very
just
impressed.
today, that fighting spirit has been there for the
Yeah.
last 1,000, 2,000 years.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it is. So it's not acceptance, or
No.
you can't
No.
do anything, so let's just
No.
accept.
I mean, and the very interesting writings which also show that, they're weapons of the weak. You appear to accept, but you fight. But also there have been movements, there have been armed movements, there have been religious movements, there have been all sorts of ways in which, in India, the large conversions which took place to Islam were people who were contesting the caste system and saying, we will not accept that. So that was also a way of fighting it.
Yeah.
There were different ways of fighting it. But also, as I said, even armed rebellions.
Yeah.
So we don't know if you want to go to that extent of fighting, but over here, Jolanda has documented contemporary things. That's why I asked. I don't know how much of history she's been able to go into, but there's a long history which has been also documented.
Yes.
That's easy.
Yeah, but I agree with your sentiments, because that's the feeling sometimes one tends to get, and I'm sure even within the Asian community itself, a certain degree of acceptance being born into a caste is I mean, in the Christian tradition, we would call it probably predestination.
Yeah, that's again an issue also what you mentioned before about language, you know. How
Yeah.
do we translate the idea of acceptance and resistance? How do we translate that properly and use the right language? Because it's very true in history and in also inbuilt, culturally inbuilt, there has been resistance always, but also a kind of resistance that we wouldn't recognize as such. It's happening. Women, for example, throughout the world, more easily recognize that as well. That being in a suppressed position because of your gender, there are still ways that you can resist, but it may not be recognized as such by men, you know. So things like that are going on here as well. And there are, of course, different cultural and religious concepts in Asia, which could, from our perspective, feel as we trust on God or inshallah or, you know, those kind of concepts. But what does it really say about the level of resistance is, it's very interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you too. Thank you all for your input. It's very interesting for me too, and I hope to keep on learning. And if any of you have connections in whatever way to this topic and you would like to leave your business card, that would be very nice. And there is a handout of the book in English. And my card is there. So I hope for more mutual exchanges in the future. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you. Boek is koop?
Ja, maar die mag ik hier niet verkopen.
Oh,
Maar
mag je die niet verkopen?
als u mijn kaartje meegeeft, dan is het online te koop. Ja.
Uitstekend.
No, you're You're working here? I'm working here. Yeah, thank you too. Can I have your card maybe? Or I just get